Hey, what's up guys, my name is Cameron Gallagher, and today we're talking about light meters and why you're probably using it wrong. Let's get into it. So if you're familiar with light meters, they are a device that basically helps you kind of set your exposure. But I think that's one of the issues that I keep seeing online is that everyone thinks that a light meter is strictly for setting exposure. And there's this weird little detail I think that a lot of videos on light meters are kind of completely missing altogether. So to give you a quick little backstory, basically a light meter is something that you take and you set it to whatever you want, and basically it tells your camera what f-stop your camera needs to be at to be properly exposed. But the thing is, in today's day and age, we say, well, what about false color and, histograms and all that kind of stuff? Like, why would we need a light meter? Well, the reality is, at least in my opinion, light meters are not so much just for exposure, but finding contrast ratios. Finding the difference between the lightest parts and the darkest parts of your image. So I wanted B&H and I actually bought this light meter because I was really in need of one. And I started to realize that there was one key thing that all of these videos didn't really discuss. And that was actually how to use the light meter. Now you may be like, wait, time out. They talk about how to use a light meter. But there's one key thing that I think every single video missed, maybe one talked about, but I've seen a lot of conflicting stuff online. And that's what I want to give you guys a heads up on today. So the big question is, how do you actually meter the light? Is it towards the camera or towards the light source? Now, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, I've seen this and I've seen that, and that's kind of how I was thinking. So I had read online that originally I had seen that you should meter towards the light. So I was like, okay, so I metered towards the light, and this is the first test I actually did. I'm playing it right now. I had metered towards the light, and I was getting, I think, 6.3, or I'm sorry, 7.1. So I stopped down to 7.1, and I noticed that it looks incredibly underexposed. So I thought, well, wait a minute, this seems weird. Like, why is that the case? So I'd seen another video of an ASC cinematographer, which I should have known that this was right, that was actually metering directly under the chin. So kind of like right under here. I gotta watch out because I got a beard, but... And they were metering right under the chin, so the chin was blocking any top light or any extra light that isn't like true light hitting the face, and that was a proper way to expose. So I started thinking, well, wait a minute. This makes no sense, because if I meter under the chin, then I'm getting every light coming at me for exposure, but then how do I find contrast ratios when I expose this way and this way? So that's what I'm gonna tell you guys about today and sort of my findings. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually meter this scene right here that I'm in, and I have another camera up here that you're probably looking at right now, looking at that monitor, and that's gonna show you kind of our histogram to give you kind of a rough idea of making sure that it looks like it's actually properly exposed. All right, so we meter right under our chin, just like that. I'm getting a 6.3. Now, I think that 6.3 is probably a little under. We're at 5.6 right now. So this is metering at 6.3, which is supposedly the correct exposure for our scene here. So again, we measure once more. And this one says 5.6. So we're probably somewhere in between 5.6 and 6.3. Me personally, I'm going to change it back. I prefer 5.6. Again, I'm also shooting in vlog, so I have a little bit of extra latitude. And again, this is one thing you want to think about is if you're shooting in something like vlog, you have a little bit of extra room. So if you like it to be a little bit maybe brighter, like which I want to be right now, feels a little more high key, even though it's not. It's pretty contrasty, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now remember that your light meter wants to set the value, this value that it reads, to middle gray or 18% gray. Now, sometimes you have to remember that that's not always your skin tone. And this is where the discrepancies come in with using a light meter. You have to know what you're looking for. So for myself, if I was going for a true, more contrasty scene, this would probably be correct. But because I have lighter skin and I'm shooting in vlog, I'd probably want to go a little bit overexposed, ever so slightly, even though this is the proper exposure, to 5.6. So let's go back to 5.6. So again, now we're at 5.6, and again, this is probably where I'd be a little bit closer to. But again, we can see that that seems right. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna meter towards the light. So if I put this towards my face, towards the light, and I hit it, we're actually getting 7.1. Now I'm gonna jump to 7.1 and show you what that looks like. So as you can probably see, this is definitely way underexposed. And as you can see on the waveform up there, everything is way underexposed. Now you may be saying, well, wait a minute, that makes no sense because I thought you see videos of people spotting to the light. So the reason why people are saying spot towards the light is actually what we're gonna get into in a minute, which is finding contrast ratios. So again, you have to remember that this is trying to find middle gray, that this is going to 18% gray. Now we're gonna switch over to false colors. I'm gonna kind of show you where 18% gray actually sits. So right now we're actually on false color, which is why up on here I look like really weird. And if you don't have false color, obviously it's not a big deal, but I just want to kind of show you guys what I'm talking about. So what I'm kind of getting at is when you meter again towards my face here, we're getting 6.3 or underneath my chin. Actually, let's block it like just a little bit under more. we're getting 5.6, which I think is really the better one. So it's maybe even a little more under your chin, probably about there. So when you look at the false color, it usually 18% gray is like that green area. And of course, the pink area is probably more where you want your skin to be. So at 5.6, you can see that the highest point of my skin, which I think is right here, yeah, right about there, is about our 5.6 exposure, ever so slightly, a little bit higher where we want our skin tone to be, especially because I'm Caucasian, so I have lighter skin, that kind of thing. So now we're going to put it to 7.1, which is what my meter said when I put it towards the light. So now here at 7.1, you can see exactly what was going on. What it was doing was it was trying to expose my face for middle gray. You can see now that the brightest points of my skin are actually in green up here, which again is showing us the 18% middle gray. All right, so what does that mean? Well, what that means is if you're looking to find your proper exposure and to give yourself a good idea of where your aperture needs to be on set, you want to use it right underneath the chin, figure out that exposure value. Now we're getting 5.6, of course. And that's going to tell you where roughly your camera should be at. But so then why is there this confusion about metering towards the light? Well, that's because it's finding contrast ratios. Now, contrast ratios are incredibly important and probably one of the most important things about using a light meter in today's day and age. So what this allows you to do is two things. So what contrast ratio is a contrast ratio is from your lightest part to your darkest part. So when you look at me right now in this scene, I'm going to be looking at my monitor here, so I'm going to be looking off. You can see that right up here is the lightest part of my face. Right here is fairly dark, so it's fairly contrasty. And then in the background, you can see that over on this side, it's much brighter. And then over on this side, this side over here, it's much darker. So what I would want to do is, let's say I wanted to light this scene the way I am right now, and I want to find those contrast ratios. This is when pointing your meter at the light actually makes sense, because what you're doing is you're finding the difference in stops between your brightest point of your image and your darkest point of your image. So what I like to do is, let's say I'm shooting an interview scene, kind of like what I would be doing right now. I would set my lights up to what I think I want. I would meter, and I would say, okay, I'm at about the right exposure I want to be at, either 5.6 or 6.3. Again, that's maybe a little more of a style choice at that point. So I know, okay, that's about where I want to be in exposure. But now I want to figure out, okay, well, I want, so my light is where I want it to be brightness-wise, but I want to figure out how much contrast ratio, what is the contrast ratio do I want? This is when metering the light makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to find out the contrast ratio right now of this scene. So I'm going to meter my face again. And right now I'm getting 7.1, right? So now remind you, this is kind of a little bit of math here. Every stop is half of light, right? So if we go from 5.6 to 6.3, that's a stop, that's half light you're cutting down. Or 6.3 to 7.1 is half, you're cutting it down to half again, another stop. So anyway, we got 7.1 here. Okay. So this is probably a little more accurate, just because it's not complete darkness, but 2.8, 3.5, 4, 5.6, 6.3, 7.1. That's about 5 stop difference. So when you do this math, that's basically a 5 stop difference in between here. Now there's a cool little formula to figure out your contrast ratio based on that. Sometimes I don't like to know the actual ratio, like, oh, is it a 12-to-1 ratio or whatnot? For me, it's more or less what I know that I'm getting in a stop of difference. So I know that this is a 5 stop difference. Now remember, our camera sensors can capture anywhere from 10 to maybe 15 stops or even more, depending on what kind of camera you're using. So again, it's something to think about is how many stop difference do you have between your lightest point and your darkest point? So anyway, after all of this technical stuff, where does this actually come in handy? And this is where it actually gets creative. And once you sort of get that technical aspect down, you can actually start really painting with light. So for instance, let's say I'm doing a scene that I'm actually doing soon enough, and I want to figure out my contrast ratio, and I know that I need to have moonlight in the scene. So in the scene in particular, I'm holding a lantern. It's very, it's very close to my face. So let's say I get my exposure for my face, right? So I know the lantern is going to be this bright on my face. I have the correct exposure and we're good there. But now it's, where do I want my moonlight to be in the background? Because of course, moonlight is very underexposed. It's not perfectly exposed. If moonlight was this bright on my face, it would be weird. So we know that moonlight is going to be underexposed. So what I can do is I can go to my background where I have my moonlight hitting the back wall. I can meter it, and I can say, okay, my face is, let's say, f1.4. So I know that my key light and my camera should be at 1.4 for proper exposure on my face. So I know, okay, that sounds good. Then I go to the background, and let's say I meter the background, and the background's at f5.6. I know that my light is properly underexposed, and that I have a big, vast difference between my lightest point and my darkest point. Now, if I were to go to the background of the moonlight and I were to meter the wall of the moonlight and it's saying f2.8, then I know that there's not a big difference between my key light and my backlight. So that's something I want to change. And that's where the true sort of creativeness of metering and using a light meter comes in, is really finding those values. But again, it's good to use it to set your exposure first, know where your key or your main light source has to be at value-wise, and then everything in the background you can then change to match that. So if I did want to have a smaller contrast ratio from 7.1 right here to 2.8 here, maybe I would add some type of fill, and then what I can do is then I can meter that and see. So I'm going to go grab my fill and we're going to see how that works. Okay, so I have a small piece of poster board right here that I'm going to be using as my fill. Now, this is how you would calculate how much fill light you want based on maybe the contrast ratio that you want or the difference in stops. So let's say I'd have my light right here. Obviously, it's in frame, but this is just for the use right now of, if I can hold this. So let's say this is going to be right here, and I want this to be my bounce. So remember, it was 2.8 before, but of course now if I were to measure that, it's going to be 3.2. So we've basically gained a stop on my face. Now, obviously, I could probably position this a lot better. Probably do it like there. And 4.5, we get even another stop. So that's the difference, is now we're cutting the stop difference between our highest point or our key light and our fill or our background or all that kind of stuff. Now I'm talking about specifically incident metering, and that is when you're using this little bulb up here that is a three-dimensional sphere. There is also spot metering, which spot metering is if actually reflected light. So let's say this doesn't have it, I don't believe. Some light meters actually have like a little thing you can look through and you can actually kind of go like, it almost looks like a Super 8 camera. And basically what I could do is I could actually spot meter something in the background. So if I was metering something like the light coming from those windows back there, or maybe reflecting off the actual wall behind me, like over there, a spot meter would be nice because you can actually see what's kind of going on. Most cameras actually kind of have a spot meter built in, which is really cool. But again, a spot meter is not incident meter and does not basically take the place of an incident meter. These are incredibly nice because this gives you the versatility to be able to find your correct exposure and then find the contrast values and the difference in stops between your lightest and darkest point of the image. So I know there's been a lot of stuff and I know it's a lot of information to take in, but really what I wanted to get down to is I wanted to show you guys the real way to use a light meter. The fact that you're setting it towards yourself, towards the camera to set your exposure, your proper exposure, but then to find contrast ratios and to find the difference in stops between your brightest and darkest by actually pointing it at the light. So that's the key thing to take away here today. Just remember, you can use these light meters for so much. Again, when you're building a scene and you want to make sure that maybe your background's not too bright, or you need the cut light or shape light, the light meter is the perfect device to kind of show you how to shape that light. Now, light meters are not cheap, unfortunately, but this one was actually, I think, the cheapest one I could get. This one was like 220 bucks. I'll leave the link in the description below, but there are some other more expensive ones that can do a lot more. And one of the other cool little things about these is you can actually measure the foot candles of a light. So if you're someone like me who does video reviews and you want to talk about maybe a light's comparison to another light, you can actually measure based on foot candles and say, okay, from 1 meter away, this light has this many foot candles and this light has this many foot candles. So that way it's 150% difference in brightness or whatever it may be. So that's one other cool little thing about light meters that you can definitely use. So anyway, guys, I hope that wasn't too much information. I hope that was helpful to you guys. And if you're thinking about getting a light meter, definitely check this little guy out. I've been pretty happy. It's just really simple and easy to use. It's not an affiliate link below too, so I'm not making any money off it. But definitely, these things are really awesome. And when it comes to especially doing things like narrative or corporate or music videos, something where you have the time where you can sit there and check these different things, this thing comes in real handy. And actually, this guy comes with a nice little pouch. You can kind of like chuck it in this little pouch. You can put it on your belt. So I can have it on my side. And then if I need to pull it out and just double check, okay, is my exposure correct? And do I have the lighting values that I want? So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this video and I'll catch you guys later.